A recent film shows Napoleon's ordering the pyramids shelled during his war in Egypt. Most historians know that Napoleon's damaging anything in Gizeh is a myth. But hold on a second. Surprisingly, there was something dodgy going on the Great Pyramid's top back then. In fact, some action may have permanently changed the pyramid's top. The clues to the mystery are buried in the measurements made by a French scientist. What exactly happened on the Great Pyramid's top during Napoleon's campaign? Could the truth imitate fiction? Let's look into this. This video will cover a mystery event on the Great Pyramid summit. As always, we colorize and enhance old photos and illustrations. If you'd like to see more videos, please like and subscribe. Past researchers have established that the Great Pyramid summit changed its size through history. Let's first summarize this research. The first scholar to scrutinize the size of the pyramid summit over time was the French archaeologist Jean Letronne. In 1814, still within Napoleon's lifetime, he collected many historical measurements. Based on the data, Letronne concluded that the top platform had progressively widened over the ages. In other words, the pyramid has been slowly shedding its top courses. Letronne noted that in 1690, de Thouars measured the summit as about 5.5 meters wide, while Nouet, a French engineer, measured 10 meters in 1799. In 1738, Pocock measured the top summit at about 7 meters. Letronne surmised that what Pocock measured was not the topmost damaged platform, but a course a bit lower. There was actually another report of 5 meters, from later than 1690, by Charles Perry, from 1734, but Letronne missed it. Pocock, Perry, and the French traveler Savary gave us the oldest views of the summit, but their depictions are tiny. In 1957, George Goyon, a French Egyptologist, was the first to state that sometime around Napoleon's time, 2 courses vanished from the pyramid's summit. He concluded this based on his graffiti research, which we'll return to later. In 1978, Goyon followed up with a second crucial observation. The platform has not changed between Napoleon's campaign and today. This meant that all major losses to the pyramid's summit occurred either before or during the Napoleonic era. In his 2022 book, Stefan Bergdahl said that 3 courses had been lost from the summit between 1765 and 1798. He thus narrowed down the time window of this event. But some of these insights were deduced from counts of the pyramid's courses, reported by various travelers through history. As this chart shows, such counts are subjective and error-prone. As an aside, this chart also shows that overcounting is far more frequent than undercounting. Recently, the channel History for Granite tracked down Davison's 1765 notebook, which gives the summit's width as 17.2 feet, or about 5 meters. Such direct width measurement is more reliable than course counts, and it confirmed the 1765 as the start of the time window for some unusual change on the summit. To avoid repetitive phrases, let's create shorthand codes for the width of the flat top platform, ignoring any loose leftover stones. P5 will be shorthand for a top flat platform that's roughly 5 meters wide. P10 will be shorthand for a top platform that's roughly 10 meters wide, that is, comparable to what we see today. These shorthand labels are independent of the course number assigned to the top platform by anyone, thus avoiding count-related confusion. So let's use this shorthand to concisely show what we've learned so far on a timeline. P5 lasts at least until 1765, setting the boundary on the left. P10 starts no later than February 5th, 1799, setting the boundary on the right. That's when one of Napoleon's savants, Edmé Jomard, measured the top platform at about 10 meters wide. Between these 2 points in time, some accelerated degradation of the pyramid's summit took place. Let's now introduce a new data point. On September 25th, 1798, Jean-Baptiste Jollois, a French engineer, scaled the Great Pyramid for the second time after a failed first attempt. He measured the summit to be 30 feet wide, very close to what Jomard would get a few months later. This pushes P10 to the left, further narrowing the time window. He also saw debris of stones fallen from higher up, both on the pyramid's courses and in the mounds at the bottom of the faces. Let's now turn our attention to the measurement by the French officer, Jacques Grobert. We don't have his portrait, but his rank was Chief of Brigade of Artillery, roughly a colonel, so at least we know how his uniform looked like. The big problem here is that he doesn't directly give the width of the top platform, nor the exact date of his measurement. Let's first tackle the date. Grobert commanded an artillery division during the Battle of the Pyramids. He approached Cairo with Napoleon's army around July 21st. Cairo surrendered on July 24th. On July 25th, Napoleon ordered the Scientific Commission to start measuring Gizeh monuments. So the earliest possible date for Grobert's measurement is July 25th, 1798. Let's now analyze Grobert's data for other clues. The two relevant reports on pyramids courses, Grobert 1798 and Davison 1795, end with a course roughly 3 feet tall. It's thus tempting to conclude that Grobert saw the same summit as Davison. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. The problem is that we can't know for sure if Grobert and Davison referred to the same layer of stones. Different observers interpret partial courses on top differently. This is the case even with the summit as it exists in modern times. Petrie saw the current remainder stones as two courses about 22 inches tall, or 55 centimeters, possibly looking at them from this angle. On the other hand, Goyon saw the top stones as one course of 3 feet 8 inches, or 1.12 meters, possibly based on these tall continuous stones. Reported dimensions of the topmost course are thus ambiguous due to unclear boundaries. To interpret Grobert properly, we'll need to dig deeper. Interestingly, Grobert actually does mention the width of the top platform, 18 feet. But it's not what he himself actually measured. He's just using the width reported by previous travelers in his proposed method of calculating the size of the whole pyramid. But this actually is an indirect clue, because these calculations come after his description of climbing and measuring the pyramid himself. Having seen the top platform by himself, Grobert does not object to the value of 18 feet in his calculations. It implies that this value did not contradict his own observation. If Grobert had seen a 30 feet wide platform, he'd probably notice that the 18 feet reported by past travelers does not match what he saw. This suggests that what Grobert saw himself was, indeed, in the ballpark of 18 feet. So did Grobert see the same summit as Davison in 1765 then? Possibly, but with a caveat. We won't get into math details here, because the full explanation would take a few minutes. But math analysis suggests the height of the pyramid that Grobert saw, corrected for his errors, was 2 to 3 feet shorter than Davison's. In other words, Grobert may have stood on the same platform as Davison, but either one course was missing, or something has been rearranged. By placing Grobert's measurement at the earliest time it may have occurred, we can now visualize the events. It seems that an unusually quick loss of material from the summit took place in the 2 months between July 25th and August 25th, 1798. To clarify, we do not mean that the entire top went missing, as a few courses had already been gone since antiquity. What we mean is that 2 or 3 stone courses disappeared in this short period, that is, at a much higher loss rate than in the past. So what caused this rapid change of the summit? We can be nearly certain it had something to do with the war. Let's first paint a picture of the Gizeh plateau at that time. It was an uninhabited no-man's land in a war zone. Even as late as early 1900s, the pyramids were still surrounded by an empty desert, besides the Mina house, built in late 1800s. After the Battle of the Pyramids, the French army set up their HQ in the former riverside residence of Murad Bey, one of the 2 rulers of Egypt. This French HQ was fortified against outside attacks with a defense wall, guard towers, and even a moat. The French savants traveled between Cairo, Gizeh, and the pyramids with armed escorts. Even soldiers weren't safe. The locals kidnapped a young French officer. When ransom payment failed, he was executed. When Napoleon traveled across Egypt, his escort numbered 300. It is very unlikely that civilian travelers would visit the pyramids at that time, nor would local guides be modifying the summit for the travelers. Perhaps a good analogy would be the Iraq War, with the fortified green zone in Baghdad, booby-trapped roads, insurgent countryside, etc. Any tourist coming to see an ancient site somewhere in the desert of Iraq at that time would be basically painting a bullseye on their back. Thanks to Goyon's graffiti dataset, we can actually chart the visitor traffic on the Great Pyramid through history. From the 1300s until 1798, the number of visitors was low and stable. There was no increase in visitor traffic just before 1798. The local guides thus would not have had any reason to alter the summit for visitors at this specific time, compared to any other time during the last few centuries. This is the big spike in graffiti during the war in Egypt, left by those involved. Some even commented on the war in their graffiti. After the war, for about 20 years, the visitors come back, at roughly the same low, pre-war numbers. Tourists were again about as rare as during the Middle Ages. There was no reason for local guides to alter the summit during the war, because the visitor traffic was low both before and after the war. A permanent, gradual rise in tourist traffic only starts after 1820, when the publication of the Description of Egypt sparked the Egyptomania of the mid-1800s. We only parsed Goyon's data to about 1870. Afterwards, tourism steadily rises, reaching 14 million peak tourist traffic in modern times. Probably a big majority of them goes to Gizeh. Of course, just like in the past, wars and social unrest today curb tourism. We actually do have a direct report of French army altering a pyramid, though a smaller one. They dismantled part of one of the Queen's pyramids of Menkaure. The goal of the French was to examine the construction of a non-plundered pyramid. Interestingly, Colonel Coutel says it was to the southeast of Menkaure, while Mark Lehner says it was the westernmost one. Whichever pyramid it was, the turning tides of the war put a stop to this dismantling effort. Here are a few examples of military use of the Great Pyramid, which took place after Napoleon's War. During World War I, heliographs, or signal mirrors, were deployed on the pyramid by the Allies. Also during World War I, a radio listening antenna on the pyramid was used by the British to detect messages from German Zeppelins. In an odd coincidence, the British engineer who installed the spy antenna was named Gill, just like the astronomer who installed the wooden surveying mast on the pyramid in 1874. During World War II, an Allied military camp was set up near the pyramids, with its HQ in the nearby Mina House. Radio equipment was deployed on Khufu's summit to protect Allied communications. Finally, let's mention that Jollois measurement took place 3 days after the troops had been sent to raise the French flag on the pyramid. In a previous episode, we asked if old graffiti on the summit may contradict the timeline discussed here. When measuring the summit in 1799, Edme Jomard mentions graffiti on the pyramid left by past explorers, some going back to 1500s. If such old graffiti had really existed on the top area of the platform, marked in red, it would be a problem. Namely, how could such old graffiti exist under courses, which had been only recently removed? Already in 1957, Goyon essentially contradicted Jomard, saying that there was next to no graffiti from before 1800 on the top platform, even though past travelers should have left many. One problem with Jomard could be unfortunate wording. He mentions old graffiti while he's on the top platform, implying that's where those graffiti were, but it wasn't the case. When cross-checked against Goyon's database of the pyramid's graffiti, including locations, Jomard's recollection seems faulty. For example, Jomard mentions a 1555 graffito with a cross and a circle symbol in the middle. Goyon lists 2 graffiti from 1555 with symbols in between, but the symbols don't match Jomard's, and they're not on the summit. In Goyon's database, the only graffito from the 1500s near the summit doesn't have a symbol. It's from 1558, and it's below the top platform. Neither did Goyon see graffiti by past travelers mentioned by Jomard, even though Goyon spent days diligently transcribing all graffiti. These discrepancies suggest that Jomard's report of graffiti simply isn't reliable enough to contradict the timeline of events suggested here. By the way, Goyon actually lived on the pyramid's summit for a few days, in a tent. In a previous episode, we suggested that if the pyramid had been used for a military purpose in the past, Those stationed there may have stayed overnight on the pyramid. We now have an example of a person who actually did live on the pyramid for some time. Goyon also climbed the pyramid nearly 100 times during his graffiti survey. Now that's dedication. Historical reports suggest that the Great Pyramid lost at least 2 courses between July 25th and September 25th, 1798. The most likely cause was some act related to the war. Here are the graffiti left on the pyramid in 1798, or possibly in 1798. Who knows, maybe one of these people wrote a letter or some other account, which may still exist in some dusty archives, still undiscovered. Someday it may tell us what exactly happened on the pyramid's summit in the hot wartime summer of 1798. For now, it remains a mystery.